Is subversion always bad? And can a story still be good art if it is also subversive? Hello and welcome to Office Hours, where we dive into your questions. Ian asks, although our modern stories inherit their heroic structure from older myths, how should we think about the tale of Shrek, which is openly parasitically subversive toward traditional fairy tale and heroic ideals? Despite all this, Shrek has become immortalized in our culture and is beloved by general audiences nearly everywhere. How should we reconcile the fact that such works stand on their own as timeless classics of our era? Well, what a fun question, especially on the back of J.R. Tolkien Talk. He attached a video, which I'll post a link to in the description. It's from Type 2 Productions, called Lord Farquaad Was Right, and I'm Tired of Pretending He's Not. It's not really important to go and watch that, but you can if you'd like. Like I said, I'll post a link in the description here. But let's go through the claim here, and I'll just list out briefly what the video says. The claim is that Shrek is parasitically subversive, and specifically parasitically subversive off of traditional fairy tale and heroic ideals. I was talking about this with my wife, who I had meant to bring in and join me, but it's tough having a 2.5-month-old and getting time to do things like this. So it's just me, unfortunately. But her contribution is that people on the political right, and even in the center now, have been complaining now for some time about the abuse of this word trauma. How, everything is trauma. All right, trauma this, trauma that. I got fired from work, that's trauma. I got rejected by a girl, that's traumatizing, and all this. And it often becomes an excuse to not do things, and a way to always view yourself as the victims. And she said, maybe subversive or subverted is like the right-wing version of trauma. It's being used kind of everywhere. Everything is subversive, depending on which corners of the internet you're in. Just wanted to throw that out there. Now, she and I actually disagree. She thinks that Shrek is not subversive. I actually agree that Shrek is subversive. I think Shrek is a subversive film. But I don't agree with the video maker. I don't agree with Type 2 Productions and his claim that Lord Farquaad was right, and I'm tired of pretending he's not. My initial impression when I listened to the video was it sounds like someone who is recreationally testing their apologetic skills to see if they can defend the indefensible, like a sophist in a Platonic dialogue or something. But there might be another possibility here. What the video says is that the film is inarguably subversive, that Lord Farquaad is totally right and totally justified in everything he does, and they make him look bad just by framing him as bad. To which my thought is, how else do storytellers indicate that a character is bad? Obviously, we have association versus their actual action, and the moral content of the action versus just the associations they make. Oh, he's short. That's not moral content, right? That's just an association that makes us dislike him, right? In some compensatory fashion or whatever. But one thing I really disagreed with is they said Farquaad is the only character with selfless motivation. Now, this I think is wrong on two fronts. First of all, it's wrong in the framing, because actually anything can be framed as selfish. Even Farquaad's desire to make a perfect town. The fact that might have beneficial effects for other people can be framed as being just for his own selfish desires. That's not really a valid point. When we're talking about the selfishness of Fiona or the selfishness of Shrek or the selfishness of Donkey or whoever else. And in their defense, they do go to lengths to say Shrek's desires are totally valid. They're not ignoble to want to preserve your own house and kick people out or whatever. But I thought that the selfless thing was a false start. And also it's a bad point because people can do very, very bad things for selfless reasons. Even out of good intentions. As Dan Dennett said, if there's anything we learned from the 20th century, is that good intentions aren't enough. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. So selflessness is not some moral excuse or even particularly a morally desirable description. This is one of the things we'll get more into Homer later. You might be shocked to hear. But it's one of the great lessons from the Iliad. When young men read the Iliad for the first time, often they think Diomedes is like much more noble than Achilles, because Achilles is this selfish guy who's crying off on the side or something. He's very selfish, looking out for his own interests at the expense of the group. It's not so noble to be so selfless. There's a naivete there. We'll get more into that kind of thing later. But none of this is particularly relevant, and I don't want to dwell on this too long, because what these guys are doing, the Type 2 Productions duo, I think it's two guys, is they're really approaching Shrek as like a political film. They're talking about this as though this is about immigration policy, right? And Duloc is like this stand-in for the United States, and the castle is a stand-in for the White House or DC or something. And in that frame, they go on to say, well, Shrek is evil and selfish. Look at him, he's eating eyeballs here. Maybe he's just telling the story, but there's the jar of them, whatever. I'm happy to grant all that, just for the sake of this video. So, sure, yeah, ogres have layers, and they're also monsters. That's their role in the story. Sure, let's grant that he is selfish and gross and not just asocial but kind of antisocial. Is this a subversive film? Yes, it is actually. But what is it subverting exactly? I think there's a problem with the filter that Type 2 Productions and other people who view Shrek as a subversive film in a political context are doing. Because when we look at the imagery, which is the clue that gives us the associations we're supposed to interpret here, like what is it we're talking about beneath the surface? What are we trying to subvert here? What does the Castle of Duloc most remind you of? Does it most remind you in its architecture style, in its characters, in its aesthetics, with all the ropes and the people in the costumes and the little info booth that gives you a pop-out version of It's a Small World and then takes your photo and hands it to you? And all the references to the other characters. Is this reminding us of Washington, D.C.? Or is it reminding us of somewhere else? Is it reminding us of perhaps Disneyland? Right? This is not about the United States. This is not about politics at all. It is about Disneyland. It is about Disney, the company. And there's actually like a lot of literature about this. People love talking about Shrek. And it is about, most importantly, I think, storytelling itself and how Disney goes about storytelling. The cleanliness of Duloc is not a stand-in for the cleanliness of America on the other side of some better immigration policy or something like that. Again, I probably agree with these guys on their political positions. I'm probably 80 to 90% on board, maybe more. I don't know, on board with their politics, but that's not what we're talking about here. The purging of the magical creatures from Duloc is not purging foreigners from America. It's purging certain ugly elements, or elements we don't know what to do with, magical elements, from storytelling, from the stories in Disney. And what makes a good story turns out not to be different from what makes a good country, but they're actually opposites. In a country, we do want order and everything. But in a story, we want plot. We want conflict. We want challenges. We want monsters and dragons and heroes. You know, we want a certain amount of ugliness, a certain amount of ominousness. And what Farquaad is purging is not just the creatures, which are ugly and obnoxious, but the magic from the stories that comes along with this. So, and this ties back to a previous Office Hours video on J.R. Tolkien and fairy stories. Not that I would say J.R. Tolkien would approve of Shrek. I'm sure he would hate Shrek, and that's fine. You know, we can disagree. It's not really his genre. But when you look at something like The Hobbit, which is meant for children and has ogres that eat dwarves, and the dwarves themselves are kind of scary in some places, and there's giant spiders, right, that Bilbo has to deal with. There's all kinds of scary stuff. And what we see in Disney and Disney films, and this is what J.R. Tolkien hated about Disney when he first saw the Snow White adaptation, is the cleansing of these scary elements, particularly of the dwarves. It turned the dwarves from these very serious and slightly scary characters into these absurd, goofy, friendly gnome characters. These are friendly and therefore not serious, right? Now again, Shrek is not bringing that back. This is a slapstick movie. It's a satirical movie. But it's not subverting the traditional stories. It's subverting the subverters of the stories. It's subverting Disney, which has been purging away all the magical stuff. And it's gotten so much worse, as I'm sure I don't need to tell anybody who's watching this, since the 1930s or 40s when Snow White came out. I don't remember what year that was. If you compare the Disney movies that are made today, Shrek was not just apropos for its and appropriate for its time, but in many ways ahead of its time. It didn't even see what Disney did in the 20-teens and the 2020s, you know. Like the big talk of the present moment, of course, is this upcoming Christopher Nolan film, his adaptation of The Odyssey, which was inspired in part by Emily Wilson's translation of it. And the casting has just been like a bad joke. You know, we have, I don't remember the names offhand. Freaking the chick who's playing Athena is some mixed race actress, which is like, you know, would be perfect and appropriate casting for a different character in a different context. Or take the story of the Odyssey and change the setting completely. Make it all take place in the Bronx. You can do that. You can do that, and it works. It's been done very well with Shakespeare plays. We'll take Romeo and Juliet, but we'll cast it in L.A. or we'll cast it in New Jersey, and all the characters are like ethnically appropriate fits in that. And you get immersion. You get the same story in a new setting, and that's great. It can work well. What's the setting of Nolan's Odyssey, right? It's like half ancient Greece, but there's Roman armor and also like late medieval Italian plate armor. And we've got this ethnic motley crew that's like central London, basically. Like, it's got a London, a contemporary central London ethnic casting with London weather to boot. In the Mediterranean, but like what are we doing? Who's gonna watch this and be like, yeah, this is like Homer right here? No, there's no cohesion there. But that is based on contemporary moral notions of perfection. And like I had to go back and watch little clips from Shrek to verify, because one of the things that the Type 2 production people said is like, well, Farquaad just wants to make a perfect town. The problem with perfection is that in any complex system, perfection is not just impossible, but is an enemy, because perfection is it creates tunnel vision. You can only be perfect in one dimension. Everything else is trade-offs, right? And so perfection from a contemporary moral standard leads to absurdities in ethnic immersion, and apparently even like weather and costume choices in other dimensions. If you are true to the values of the time, you might create something ugly by contemporary moral standards. Or if you were to go, historically accurate with like Bronze Age armor, and people have done all kinds of AI mock-ups of what this would look like. Bronze Age Greek armor was kind of weird looking. You get these guys in like these bronze tubes that kind of flare out at the bottom, like this kind of weird rigid dress thing, and they have like helmets with horns on them, and it's very odd looking. It's not this sleek, beautiful Roman kind of centurion armor that we like to see in other places. It can rub us the wrong way aesthetically, So like the idea of perfection, and this is a point I've brought up in theological discussions, because the idea of perfection is actually ontologically deep in many people's conception of the idea of God. Perfection is not a real thing. Perfection is a linguistic construct that we have used to describe certain experiences. Like, wow, that person's shot was perfect with a rifle or a soccer ball or a basketball. Like wow, that athletic performance was perfect. Oh, that drawing was perfect. They're describing an experience in relation to a thing. It's not actually a metaphysical category, though. And when you try to take that experience and turn it into a metaphysical category, you create monsters. And not monsters of the Shrek variety. You create monsters like Lord Farquaad. Monsters like the Disney Corporation. So, like, what is it that Shrek is doing? What is it that Shrek is defending? I think if you were to distill it down to, like, what is the one central theme of Shrek? It's kind of ugliness. But it's not defending ugliness at like per se. There is an initial experience of ugliness, but as Shrek says, ogres have layers, right? They're like onions. There are layers beneath this. J.R. Tolkien would say this, as many of these fairy stories have kennings, which is an Anglo-Saxon word for like layers of understanding beneath the initial story. You see this with the Odyssey. There's deeper understandings of what these things are. Polyphemus is a cyclops. He's a monster. He's also a representation. He's also a symbol. What does the word Polyphemus mean? Does that meaning tie into anything we might have seen from the Iliad that was motivating characters there? And what's Odysseus's relation to that theme beside just the monster? There's all kinds of layers to these stories and the meaning underneath these very superficially ugly aspects of them. And so if we set aside our initial experience of ugliness, whether that's aesthetic, whether that's moral, right? Because how some of the ancients might have talked about other ethnicities might strike us as not particularly morally desirable. We might think how the people thought about slavery in the past. We might think as very like morally beneath us. But set that aside for a moment if you want to understand this. As I was talking with my wife, she disagreed with me on this too. I don't think she really disagreed, but she said it's not just about ugliness. It's about being understood. It's about being seen in your true nature, rather than the created appearances of things. So much of Duloc and the Castle of Duloc is about transparently superficial appearances, from Farquaad's stature on his horse and stuff to this weird Potemkin village feeling of the town, that I think is done very intentionally. It is all about the appearances and not about understanding the thing itself. Fairy tales, as J.R. Tolkien tells us, are not meant to be understood on our terms. And Greg Naj, I think, backs this up too. We have to go into their world to understand these stories on their own terms. And that's weirdly artistically present in Shrek. Now, again, Shrek is not doing a traditional fairy story. Shrek is not imitating Hans Christian Andersen or the Brothers Grimm or Aesop or anything like that. It is managing to create something original, while at the same time it is defending the old stuff, and it's defending that by subverting and undermining and mocking Disney and the spirit of Disney, how Disney approaches this storytelling technique, with the purging away, the pogrom on the on the magical elements, the morally and aesthetically and developmentally inappropriate for children elements of the story that we'd rather not deal with. We don't want to deal with that messy stuff. We'll just make pretty stories that are unproblematic. Stuff like Moana. By the way, I'm not criticizing Moana. I think Moana is a perfectly fine story. But it doesn't have anything in it that might risk being considered morally problematic by today's standards, or aesthetically problematic. Do ancient Polynesian cultures think that way? What did ancient Polynesian cultures think about things like slavery or ethnicity or these sorts of things? We might not like it. Let's not include that in here. Now, of course, Shrek doesn't too. Shrek is not trying to, bring in questionable elements like, witches cutting off children's fingers, or something like we might read in a Hans Christian Andersen story. But it is depicting that purgation. It is depicting that in how corporations treat these stories. And it is mocking them. And it is, I think more than anything else, it is itself incredibly artful in how it does it. And I think the audience experience and the universal acclaim that Shrek has achieved is not actually due to its subversive component, although there is that there too. And I think people are cheering along when they see DreamWorks kind of kick Disney in the nuts like this. We like to see people who are ruining things that we like get punished. Schadenfreude is real, and we see that. But I think what they liked a lot more than that is the art of the film itself. It's a well done film. The characters are really good. Farquaad is a very good character, not morally good. He's a well developed and played character. Shrek is a great character. Donkey is a phenomenal character, right? And this carries on to Shrek 2 as well. And I think something that deserves extra attention and credit is the soundtrack, the music score. There's one of my wife and I's favorite YouTube creators is a music commentator whose channel is called Sideways. And he's got a video just on the Shrek music score and how excellent it is, how perfect, to borrow a phrase from Farquaad, how exceptional, perfect in the experiential sense, right? This music score was at a time when other films were also trying to use pop music and just failing miserably. They bring up Suicide Squad as like a particularly exemplary example of horrible. So, I mean, there's a lot of bad things about that film. Apparently, I haven't seen it, but that video. I'll also post a link to that because Sideways is a phenomenal channel. Really, really good music commentary in all kinds of domains on this. And I think the audience experience is a testimony to the quality of the art of the film itself, the music, the characters, the story itself, which is a play on an old Camelot tale. It's a play on the story of Gawain and the old woman who he has to marry as compensation for killing an innocent man, if my memory serves me. He has to go out and marry this old woman, and he discovers in the process of setting up the wedding stuff that this old woman actually turns into a beautiful young woman at night. And at the wedding, she presents him with a choice. She says, you have the option of flipping this. I can be a beautiful woman at night, fun times, but I'll be an ugly old woman during the day, i.e. when you show me to everyone else, this is the woman I'm married to, blah, blah, blah. Or I can be a beautiful woman during the day, but I'll be an ugly old crone at night. And Gawain's answer is, he looks at her, he thinks about it, and he says, which one would you prefer? And that question breaks the spell, and then she's a beautiful woman all the time. So there's a parallel there that Shrek is drawing from. If anything, Shrek is not just subverting Disney stories, but Shrek is beautifully subverting this just grotesquely ugly, horrific children's book that came out in 1990 called Shrek by William Steig. You can go find it online. I might post the link there. I don't know if I've ever seen a worse children's story in my entire life. It is so bad. It's just ugly for ugliness sake. There's no redeeming quality. The writing is just bad. Not only are the characters ugly, the way the drawings are done is also ugly. Like, it's an ugly drawing of an ugly thing. It looks like a 10 or 11-year-old drew it as a joke, you know. It's and the movie takes the characters and the rough plot line kind of, and it subverts that, and it makes something beautiful out of it, which is its own kind of subversion of whatever William Steig's intent was with that horrible, atrocious children's book. So it's all interesting food for thought. I would encourage people who've spent time on certain parts of the internet to be mindful of the word subversion and to think about, first of all, is subversion always bad? If we're subverting bad things, right? There is, I think, a sort of allergic response people have developed to subversion, which is healthy in many ways because there has been a lot of subversion, especially in the last 60 years or so. And people are beginning to notice, and they're beginning to notice the techniques and strategies of it, and they don't like it when it's used against the things that they love. But how about when it's used against the things that are subverting the things that you love? Is that the same thing? Or should you religiously abstain from that, like some kind of pacifist. I think there is something to culture jamming. I think one of the great subversive artists of our time is Sam Hyde. I might post a link to this because it's so good. Sam Hyde delivered many years ago a TED Talk that is essentially a TED Talk about TED Talks, and it's such great performative subversion of the concept of a TED Talk, and it's good. It's first of all, it's hilarious, but it's also mocking a bad thing that people were doing. And also the TED Talks that he's mocking were a perfect example of people doing something bad and self-congratulatory and self-righteous in the most lame way, with the best of intentions, So I think I would agree that Shrek is subversive, but I would disagree that what it is subverting is the traditional fairy tale and heroic ideals. It's subverting Disney and its appropriation and commercialization of those very things and asphyxiation of them in that commercialization. And we see that commercialization in the Castle of Duloc and in the person of Lord Farquaad, and we see the sort of mockery of that with the messiness of the fairy creatures and the ugliness of Shrek himself, which is this very obnoxious sort of stick in the spokes of the perfect, clean world of fairy tales that Disney wants to create where there is no magic. Well, the old stories are still here. The old stories, we can go back and read them. We can read Homer in the original Greek, and there's a lot of ugliness there. Yeah, there were slaves. Yeah, there was, not only was there taking war brides, but in one case, the war bride, Briseis, was really sad about the death of Patroclus, one of her captors, because he promised that Achilles would marry her. And she was really looking forward to that. What's a modern moralist supposed to make of that? Different times. We can't look at it from our perspective. We have to put our minds back in that time and from that perspective to see it there. And it's great to see the institutional engines that are reframing everything from the past through a modern lens. DEI castifying the films and making it all progressive and stuff. Seeing that subverted, it's kind of fun to see. And if we're defending the old ideas while we're at it, extra fun, extra points. So I hope that answers the question. It's an excellent question, and I think it's a strangely politically and culturally important question, because it's always important to ask these philosophical framing questions, like what's the genre we're looking at here, and what is the subject, and not necessarily get immediately too caught up in the mechanism that is going on and judge it based on associations, like, oh, they're doing this thing, bad people do this thing, therefore that person is bad. It's like, well, violence is done by bad people, and violence is also done by good people. Subversion is done by bad people. Subversion is also done by good people. The KGB was attempting to subvert the United States. The CIA was attempting to subvert the Soviet Union, or the OSS, whatever it was at the time. And that war is still going on with various other actors. Some of these intelligence agencies are trying to protect its people from foreign subversion ops and vice versa, and sometimes that involves using those techniques on your own population. Oh my gosh, what do you think of that? Kind of don't like it. What's the alternative, though? These are complex questions, and an act is, unless you are a Kantian, not an intrinsically good or evil thing. It depends on the context, and in this way, I don't think subversion is inherently always bad. And in a story like this, not only is it, I think, morally justified in defense of fairy stories, but it's also artistic. It's very artfully done. So, thanks so much for the wonderful question. Thanks for listening, and take care.